I am Clara Sullivan. I am in my late 20s, and just last week, I sat perfectly still and watched my own mother's highly lucrative, meticulously curated career violently collapse into ash, all because of a single, physical photograph she arrogantly forgot to destroy. You have highly likely seen her face on your screens. Genevieve Sullivan, the internet's ultimate, flawless matriarch. Nearly 1 million devoted followers hanging desperately onto her every published word regarding how to raise children with infinite patience, boundless love, and aesthetic grace. Her lengthy, philosophical blog posts are routinely syndicated by major parenting publications. Her debut memoir recently debuted on the national bestseller lists. But here is the massive, devastating catch that her audience does not know. She actually gave birth to 3 children. Her massive, monetized digital empire only publicly acknowledges the existence of 2. I am the specific child she methodically, surgically cut out of the narrative. Literally. In every single published family portrait, every glossy holiday card, and every single sponsored milestone post, there is always a strangely cropped, empty edge exactly where my body used to stand. Just last week, a prominent investigative journalist requested to conduct a live, televised interview profiling the internet's most perfect family. My mother eagerly agreed to the exposure. She arrogantly believed she maintained absolute, ironclad control over her curated universe. She possessed absolutely no idea that I still secretly held all of the unedited, original photographs. Before I take you through exactly what explosively unfolded inside that television studio, please, if you are finding yourself captivated by this story of survival, take a brief moment to engage with this video. But I ask that you only do so if this narrative genuinely resonates with your own soul. And I would love to know exactly who is watching this right now. Please drop your current city and your local time down in the comments section. Now, I need to pull you backward in time. Let me take you back exactly 4 weeks to the dark, chaotic night I received a phone call that permanently altered the trajectory of my entire existence. The emergency trauma ward was absolute, unadulterated chaos that particular evening. We were simultaneously managing a critical code blue in the 3rd bay and a catastrophic multi-vehicle collision in the main trauma center. I had been sprinting across the linoleum floors for 11 consecutive hours when my personal cell phone unexpectedly vibrated deep inside the pocket of my medical scrubs. I glanced at the glowing screen. It was an unknown number originating from the specific area code of my childhood hometown. I intentionally let it ring through to voicemail. Whoever was attempting to reach me could certainly wait. The critically bleeding patient resting on the gurney in front of me absolutely could not. Nearly 20 minutes later, I finally collapsed into a plastic chair in the dim, quiet break room and stared blankly at the new voicemail notification icon. My trembling thumb hovered hesitantly over the delete button. Absolutely nothing positive or healthy had ever originated from that specific area code in my entire life. But some strange instinct compelled me to press play. "Miss Sullivan," the voice on the recording began. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I am an independent investigative journalist currently compiling a comprehensive expose regarding the dark underbelly of parenting influencers. I urgently need to speak with you regarding your biological mother, Genevieve Sullivan." My styrofoam coffee cup abruptly stopped halfway to my lips. I successfully unearthed an archived municipal school enrollment ledger dating back to 2009. The journalist continued. "You were legally, explicitly listed as Genevieve Sullivan's eldest daughter. However, according to absolutely every piece of publicly available media she has produced for a decade, she exclusively claims to only possess 2 children." A heavy, loaded pause hung on the recording. "I would be incredibly interested to hear your unvarnished side of this story." I immediately deleted the voicemail file. Then, I sat completely paralyzed in the dark, silent break room, my hands shaking so violently I had to place my coffee cup on the table. 12 long, grueling years. 12 entire years I had spent aggressively, meticulously building a beautiful, independent life where that toxic woman absolutely did not exist. I possessed a highly respected medical career, a beautiful apartment, and close friends who knew absolutely nothing about the terrified, invisible girl I used to be. And now, a complete stranger was casually asking me to aggressively dig up all the corpses I had buried. I caught my own exhausted reflection in the dark glass of the break room window. There it undeniably was. The thin, jagged, faded scar resting just above my left eyebrow. It was a permanent, physical reminder of my childhood that I could not simply crop out or delete, no matter how desperately I tried. My cellular phone sat innocuously on the table, resembling an active grenade with the pin already half pulled out. I logically knew I should have instantly blocked the phone number. I should have completely pretended I had never listened to that specific message. Instead, I carefully saved the audio file. I intentionally saved her contact information, too. I honestly did not know exactly why I did it in that specific moment. But some deeply buried, resilient fragment of my soul, the exact part one had spent 12 years aggressively attempting to silence and pacify, already intrinsically knew that I was eventually going to call her back. The very first time my mother actively, intentionally erased my existence, I was only 14 years old. I remember the exact, devastating day with perfect, agonizing clarity. It was late December, just before the holidays. She was aggressively preparing to launch her brand new lifestyle blog, The Flawless Matriarch, and she desperately required aesthetic photographs for the website's main header banner. "Clara, please come into the home office and assist me with scanning these physical images," she called out from down the hallway. I was actually incredibly, foolishly excited. This was an incredibly rare occurrence, my mother proactively asking for my assistance with a project she deeply cared about. I carefully carried massive stacks of printed family photographs over to the flatbed scanner, gently handling every single image as if it were a priceless, fragile artifact, because those captured memories were incredibly precious to my starved heart. "This specific one is my absolute favorite," I commented, holding up our professional holiday portrait from the previous winter. My father had joyously lifted me high onto his broad shoulders so I could place the golden star at the very top of the massive tree. My younger sister, Olivia, was laughing brightly at the camera. My baby brother, Liam, was just a tiny toddler resting comfortably in my mother's arms. We genuinely looked incredibly happy. We looked exactly like a normal, loving family. My mother snatched the photograph from my hands and studied it intensely for a very long, quiet moment. Then, she seamlessly opened her digital photo editing software. I stood silently behind her desk and watched as she deliberately selected the aggressive cropping tool. "Mom, what exactly are you doing?" I asked, my voice laced with sudden confusion. "The visual composition of the image is simply significantly better structured this way," she replied. Her voice was completely flat, entirely clinical, devoid of any maternal warmth. "You were awkwardly blocking the lighting on Olivia's face." I absolutely was not blocking a single thing, I protested weakly. I was simply standing directly next to her. But right there on the glowing computer monitor, I actively watched my own physical body disappear. One simple, clinical click of the mouse, and I was permanently gone. There, my mother smiled a chilling, satisfied smile at the newly altered version. Absolutely perfect. That was merely the very first time she erased me. It was absolutely not the last. I did not manage to sleep a single wink after listening to Sarah Jenkins's voicemail. Instead, I engaged in an activity I had strictly forbidden myself from doing for years. I aggressively searched my mother's name on the internet. Genevieve Sullivan. The internet's perfect mom. Nearly 1 million devoted followers. A highly lucrative, multi-book publishing deal. Glossy, multi-page magazine features. I slowly scrolled through her curated social media grid. Hundreds upon hundreds of perfectly lit, aesthetic photographs. Extravagant birthday celebrations, proud graduations, luxurious family vacations. Olivia was prominently featured in absolutely every single shot. Liam was heavily featured as well. Even my passive, cowardly father made frequent, smiling appearances. But me? Not a single, microscopic trace. Looking at her digital empire, it was exactly as if I had never taken a single breath on this earth. Growing up inside the walls of the Sullivan household, I quickly, brutally learned how to make myself completely invisible. I did not do this because I inherently wanted to be ignored. I did it because it was the absolute only method of psychological survival. On the day of my 15th birthday, my mother was obsessively filming Olivia's very first formal ballet recital. I absolutely cannot speak with you right now, Clara. This specific event is incredibly important for the brand, she had hissed at me, waving me away. During the mandatory high school parent-teacher conferences, she arrived over 20 minutes late, sighed loudly, and then explicitly told my concerned homeroom teacher I possess 2 other young children at home who actually desperately require my maternal attention. Every single evening around the sprawling dinner table, Olivia animatedly chattered about her daily adventures. Little Liam proudly showed off his chaotic finger paintings. I simply sat completely silently at the far end of the table, mechanically eating my meal, constantly wondering if absolutely anyone in the room would even notice if I just ceased showing up to dinner entirely. Absolutely no one ever did. But the absolute worst, most agonizing part of the abuse was not the blatant neglect from my mother. It was watching my father silently witness absolutely every single atrocity and actively choose to do absolutely nothing to intervene. He would occasionally catch my eye from across the crowded dinner table or glance at me in the dim hallway immediately following one of my mother's exceptionally cruel, cutting remarks. His facial expression would briefly twist into something that almost closely resembled genuine guilt, but he never once opened his mouth to defend me. Never a single time. Your mother is currently operating under an immense amount of professional pressure, honey, he would urgently whisper to me when we were completely alone. Just please, try your absolute hardest not to upset her delicate balance. Do not upset her. Do not take up too much physical space in the house. Do not exist too loudly. I received the toxic message loud and clear. By the time I reached my 16th birthday, I had become an absolute master at the dark art of disappearing. I spent every single afternoon hiding in the dusty corners of the local municipal library. I spent my evenings retreating to my friends' houses. I spent my time absolutely anywhere that was not inside my own home. I pathetically, foolishly thought that if I just managed to make myself small enough, quiet enough, and perfectly good enough, perhaps she would finally, miraculously see my worth. I consistently maintained straight A's on my report cards. I achieved the prestigious honor roll every single academic semester. I proactively volunteered for grueling shifts at the local hospital on my weekends. My mother absolutely never, ever mentioned a single one of my achievements. But the exact moment Olivia successfully won a minor, regional spelling bee, that mundane event made the front page of the blog, complete with a sprawling, 1,500-word philosophical essay about the secrets to raising a brilliant champion. I was not even permitted to be visible in the audience photographs of the event. I had been aggressively edited out of those images, too. There was exactly one human being who truly saw me during those dark years. Mrs. Gable. She taught 8th grade literature at my middle school. She possessed unruly gray hair, incredibly kind, observant eyes, and a highly specific way of looking directly at her students that genuinely made you feel like your existence mattered in the universe. I vividly remember the exact day she quietly sat down directly next to me in the chaotic school cafeteria. I was sitting completely alone, as was my usual custom. I possessed absolutely no lunch. My mother had conveniently forgotten to leave me any grocery money on the counter yet again. "Do you mind if I join you today?" she asked politely, but she absolutely did not wait for my verbal permission. She simply sat down and smoothly slid exactly half of her own turkey and Swiss sandwich across the table toward me. "I deeply hope you don't mind, turkey." I was entirely too starving to refuse the charity. She did not interrogate me with probing questions that afternoon. She did not offer me performative pity. She just quietly sat in solidarity with me while I ate, casually discussing classic literature, the changing weather patterns, and absolutely nothing of heavy importance. But a few short weeks later, she explicitly asked me to remain in the classroom after the final bell rang. "Clara, I urgently need to ask you something." Her voice was incredibly gentle, yet profoundly serious. "Is absolutely everything okay inside your home?" My heart completely stopped beating in my chest. A massive part of my soul desperately wanted to spill absolutely everything to her. I wanted to tell her about the edited photographs, the suffocating, intentional silence, and the chilling way my own mother looked straight through my body exactly as if I were constructed of clear glass. But I could violently hear my mother's voice echoing in my skull. What occurs inside the walls of this house strictly stays inside this house. I am perfectly fine, Mrs. Gable, I lied, forcing a bright, unbothered smile onto my face. Are you really? She asked softly. She pointedly looked down at my wrist, directly at the dark, purple bruise I had been desperately attempting to keep hidden beneath my long sweater sleeve. My mother had violently grabbed my arm entirely too hard the previous evening, enraged about some minor, trivial infraction that I could not even recall anymore. Mrs. Gable did not aggressively push me to confess, but as I hurriedly exited the classroom, I clearly saw her begin to write something down in a heavy, official-looking notebook. I completely forgot about that specific interaction. I did not think about it again until years later, when I finally discovered exactly what she had actually done to try and save my life. She had formally filed an official report, but someone incredibly powerful had ensured that specific report permanently disappeared, exactly like I did. I officially left that toxic house during the spring semester of my junior year of high school. I did not dramatically run away into the night. I intentionally, permanently left. There is a massive, fundamental psychological difference between the two actions. It all started with incredibly good news. Life-altering news, actually. I had just been officially accepted into a highly competitive, accelerated nursing program. It included early university admission and a comprehensive, full-ride academic scholarship. It was my absolute, golden ticket out of the nightmare. I literally sprinted the entire way home, clutching the heavy acceptance letter tightly against my chest. For one brief, agonizingly stupid moment, I genuinely believed that this massive achievement would be the specific thing that finally, miraculously made her proud of me. My mother was standing in the center of the pristine living room. The heavy camera tripod was aimed directly at Olivia. They were currently filming a tutorial on teaching Olivia how to bake artisanal pastries. A decorative whiteboard situated behind them read, "Our sacred mother-daughter tradition." "Mom, I successfully got accepted," I shouted, proudly holding the official letter high in the air. A full academic scholarship. The elite nursing program at the state university. She absolutely did not even bother to lift her eyes away from the camera's glowing viewfinder. "That is very nice, honey," she muttered dismissively. "But I am incredibly busy right now. This is specifically Olivia's time, sweetheart. Stir the thick batter significantly slower, Olivia." Yes, exactly like that. Absolutely perfect. I stood frozen in the corner of that living room for 2 entire hours. I patiently waited for a break in the filming. I desperately waited for her to simply acknowledge that her oldest biological daughter had just successfully achieved something profoundly worth celebrating. She absolutely never did. When the camera equipment was finally powered down, I tentatively tried one last time. "Mom, please, can we just sit down and talk for exactly 5 minutes?" She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. The highly specific kind of sigh that aggressively communicated that my mere existence was an unbearable burden to her. "Do you genuinely want to know exactly why I absolutely refuse to make time for you, Clara?" She finally turned her head and looked directly into my eyes. "Perhaps if you were inherently easier to love, I would actually try harder." The venomous words hit my system exactly like a violent, physical blow to the stomach. I absolutely did not break down and cry. I did not scream in rage. I simply turned around, quietly walked up the stairs to my bedroom, packed a single, heavy canvas backpack with my essential belongings, and I permanently left the premises. There were absolutely no tearful goodbyes. There was zero dramatic, cinematic exit. I just quietly walked out the heavy front door at 11 o'clock at night, and I absolutely never returned. Absolutely nobody in that house ever came searching for me. The very next morning, my mother seamlessly uploaded a new, highly produced video to her platform. Self-Care Sunday with my absolutely amazing children. Olivia and Liam were prominently featured, laughing and smiling. I was completely absent. I had effectively not existed to her for years. Now, the erasure was officially, permanently finalized. Exactly 2 agonizing days after receiving Sarah's voicemail, I still had not possessed the courage to call her back. I continuously lied to myself, claiming I absolutely did not want to engage. I told myself that violently digging up the buried corpses of my past would only result in my own destruction. I rationalized that I had aggressively built a beautiful, successful life, and I absolutely did not need to detonate it simply for the sake of some journalist's career-making exposé. But the unvarnished, brutal truth was that I was absolutely terrified. I was terrified that if I finally started speaking the truth out loud, I would completely lose control and never be able to stop. I was deeply terrified that absolutely no one in the world would actually believe my story. I was terrified that perhaps, in some dark corner of the universe, my mother was actually correct. Perhaps I truly was just inherently too damaged and broken to be loved. Then, a minor, seemingly insignificant interaction occurred at the hospital that permanently altered my perspective. I was routinely checking the vitals on Mrs. Abernathy, a sweet, 73-year-old patient recovering from a complex hip replacement surgery. She possessed incredibly sharp, observant eyes. "Do you have any children of your own, honey?" she asked pleasantly while I carefully adjusted her intravenous drip. "No, ma'am," I replied softly. "Do you have close family nearby?" I hesitated for a fraction of a second. "It is incredibly complicated." She gently reached out and patted the back of my hand. In my long experience, complicated usually signifies that there is a powerful story desperately worth telling. Her simple words echoed heavily in my mind throughout the remainder of my grueling shift. Worth telling. Was my agonizing story actually worth telling the world? At 11 o'clock that night, I sat completely alone in my vehicle in the dark hospital parking lot, staring intensely at Sarah's phone number glowing on my screen. 12 entire years I had spent aggressively running and hiding in the shadows. What if the act of running was the exact specific thing that was permanently keeping me trapped in the trauma? I forcefully pressed the call button before my fear could convince me to abort the mission. She answered on the very first ring. "Clara Sullivan." I have been eagerly waiting for this specific call. "I absolutely do not have time for pretense or small talk," I stated firmly. "I am absolutely not writing a fluffy, complimentary puff piece," she replied instantly. "I am aggressively investigating high-profile influencers who construct massive, lucrative brands entirely upon a foundation of toxic lies. Your biological mother is currently at the absolute top of my list." "Why her specifically?" I asked. "Because she aggressively, publicly claims to only possess 2 children. But I have successfully uncovered buried municipal documents that strongly suggest otherwise." A heavy pause hung on the line. "I successfully located your old public school enrollment records, Clara. I found your archived pediatric medical files. You undeniably existed in this world. And someone incredibly powerful went to an enormous amount of trouble to aggressively ensure the rest of the world completely forgot that fact." My hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the steering wheel. "What exactly do you desperately want from me?" "I want the absolute, unvarnished truth. And I want any physical, concrete evidence you might still possess." "Evidence?" I immediately thought of the heavy cardboard box currently shoved into the deepest, darkest corner of my apartment closet. The specific box I had absolutely not possessed the courage to open in 12 years. "We need to schedule an in-person meeting immediately," I stated. The cardboard box was resting exactly where I had abandoned it. On the absolute top shelf of my bedroom closet, hidden behind heavy winter coats I almost never wore. Written across the side in thick, faded black permanent marker, 2009. "Do not open." I had stubbornly carried that heavy, miserable box through 6 different apartment leases, 3 separate cities, and 1 incredibly toxic, devastating romantic breakup. I had absolutely never once opened the flaps. I had never even allowed myself to peek inside until tonight. The cheap cardboard was incredibly soft and degrading with age. I aggressively sliced through the yellowing packing tape with a pair of surgical scissors, my hands surprisingly steady despite the roaring adrenaline in my system. Resting inside was my old, pathetic high school diary, a few battered paperback novels, a cheap, braided friendship bracelet from a girl whose face I could no longer even recall, and a thick, heavy manila folder. My heart completely stopped beating the exact second my eyes locked onto it. I had genuinely, completely forgotten. Somehow, impossibly, my traumatized brain had entirely repressed the fact that I had covertly stolen these specific photographs before I fled the house. Dozens upon dozens of them. The unedited, raw originals. The exact images my mother had meticulously scanned into her computer prior to executing her malicious, digital edits. Christmas morning, 2008, the four of us standing happily in front of the towering tree. I was standing directly next to Olivia, both of us laughing joyously at the camera. Easter Sunday, 2007, a sprawling family brunch hosted at my grandmother's house. I was proudly holding baby Liam in my arms. My mother's milestone birthday, 2009, the entire family gathered tightly around her elaborate cake. I was the specific person who had spent hours baking and decorating it. I slowly spread the physical photographs across my bedspread. Then, I pulled up my mother's highly curated social media feed on my smartphone. I found the exact same images, but they were chillingly, violently different. Every single one of the digital uploads had been aggressively, surgically cropped. I was meticulously, cleanly removed from every single shot, exactly as if my physical body had never occupied that space and time. And then I uncovered the printed email. It was folded sharply in half and shoved aggressively into the absolute bottom of the heavy folder. I honestly did not possess a single memory of secretly printing and saving this document either. It was sent from genevieve.sullivan@gmail.com to evelyn.russo@brightliterary.com. Date, March 15, 2012. Regarding the upcoming family branding strategy, I want to be entirely, explicitly clear. I only possess 2 children. Please ensure you absolutely never mention the name Clara in any of our promotional materials or press releases. She is absolutely not a part of this brand. I sat on the edge of my bed and read that specific, venomous sentence 3 times. She is absolutely not a part of this brand. I had not simply been casually forgotten or overlooked. I had been aggressively, maliciously erased on purpose to protect her financial empire. And now, I finally possessed the undeniable, explosive proof to destroy her. Sarah and I met at a quiet, independent coffee shop located 3 towns over. It was safe, neutral territory. Sarah was significantly younger than her voice had suggested over the phone, perhaps in her late 30s. She possessed incredibly sharp, analytical facial features and even sharper, penetrating eyes. She ordered a black coffee and immediately got straight down to business. I desperately need to know exactly why you are pursuing this specific exposé, I demanded before she could even open her notebook. Why this particular story? Why target my mother specifically? She slowly stirred her black coffee, but absolutely did not take a sip. My absolute best friend during our university years was a girl named Maya, Sarah began, her voice incredibly steady, but heavily laced with unresolved pain. Her own mother was a highly prominent mommy blogger, long before the industry became as massive as it is today. I remained silent and waited for her to continue. It was always a picture-perfect, highly curated family aesthetic. Endless, inspirational posts about the beauty of raising daughters with infinite grace and kindness. Maya tragically took her own life during our junior year of college. A sharp, physical pain hit my chest. I am so incredibly sorry. The digital comments flooding her mother's blog that day were all exactly the same, Sarah continued, finally looking directly into my eyes. I am so incredibly sorry for your tragic loss. You were such an absolutely amazing, dedicated mother. Absolutely nobody in the public sphere knew that her mother had not spoken a single word to her in over 6 months. Absolutely nobody knew that her mother had explicitly told Maya that her depression made her entirely too difficult and exhausting to love. I felt completely, physically sick to my stomach. I am absolutely not asking you to vindicatively destroy your mother's life, Sarah stated firmly. I am simply asking you to finally stand up and tell your unvarnished truth to the world. Exactly what she chooses to do with the fallout of that truth is entirely on her conscience. I slowly reached into my heavy leather bag and pulled out the thick manila folder. I possess the physical photographs, I stated, the raw originals and the manipulated, cropped versions she published. I carefully spread the damning evidence across the small wooden table. And I also possess this. I slid the printed email across the table. Sarah read the brief, venomous paragraph once. Then she aggressively reread it. Her facial expression remained incredibly professional and unchanged, but I clearly saw her knuckles turn white as her grip tightened on the paper. She is absolutely not a part of this brand, Sarah breathed out slowly. This is exactly the explosive evidence I desperately needed. I took a deep breath. There might actually be significantly more evidence to uncover. I proceeded to tell her absolutely everything about Mrs. Gable. I told her about the official abuse report that miraculously vanished into thin air. Sarah looked at me with an expression that looked terrifyingly similar to profound respect. Are you genuinely, psychologically prepared for the absolute hellfire that is going to happen next? I sat there and thought deeply about that terrified, invisible 14-year-old girl who was coldly told she was too broken to be loved. I have been actively preparing for this exact moment for 12 entire years. If you are still sitting there, walking alongside me in this dark narrative, thank you. This specific part of the story is incredibly painful to recount, and knowing that you are actively listening makes the burden significantly lighter. If you have ever intimately felt like an invisible ghost haunting your own family, please drop a black heart emoji in the comments section. And if you strongly believe I should absolutely walk onto that television set and expose her, please hit the like button right now. Let us plunge into exactly what happened next. Exactly 3 days later, Sarah sent an urgent text message containing a digital hyperlink. You absolutely need to see this immediately. I clicked the link, which directed me to my mother's highly trafficked social media profile. There was a brand new, highly produced post aggressively pinned to the absolute top of her feed. Massive announcement. I am so unbelievably thrilled to officially share that my upcoming book, Raising Perfection, A Mother's Ultimate Guide to Nurturing Excellence, is officially hitting bookstore shelves next month. To joyously celebrate this milestone, I will be executing an exclusive, live televised interview featuring my entire, beautiful family. Please stay tuned for the exciting details. The accompanying high-resolution photograph featured my mother, my father, Olivia, and Liam meticulously arranged in their pristine living room exactly like models in a high-end furniture catalog. Everyone possessed a blinding, perfect smile. Below the image was a short, slick promotional video clip. I aggressively pressed play against my better judgment. What exactly is your ultimate secret to successfully raising such incredibly wonderful, well-adjusted children? The off-screen interviewer asked enthusiastically. My mother's flawless face filled the screen, positively glowing with that heavily practiced, artificial maternal warmth she had spent a decade perfecting. Absolute presence, she answered smoothly. I am absolutely always physically and emotionally present for my children. Every single milestone, every single shed tear, every single triumphant victory. I absolutely never, ever miss a single moment of their lives. I violently slammed my laptop shut. Never miss a single moment. She had aggressively, intentionally missed 18 entire years of my life. My cellular phone buzzed loudly on the desk. It was Sarah. The highly publicized interview is scheduled to air in exactly 2 weeks. It is a live broadcast on the premier local morning station. They're aggressively billing it as a wholesome, inspirational, family values feature segment. I stared blankly at the incoming text message, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. If you genuinely want to execute this plan, she sent a follow-up message. This is your absolute, golden window of opportunity. 2 weeks. I possessed exactly 14 days to ultimately decide whether I was going to cowardly continue running in the shadows, or finally plant my feet and stand completely still. I looked down at the heavy manila folder resting on my desk. The unedited photographs. The damning email. 12 agonizing years of suffocating silence. My mother was preparing to confidently sit in front of 500,000 viewers and boldly claim what an absolutely spectacular, dedicated mother she was. She was preparing to aggressively monetize a book about raising children with boundless love and absolute presence. And she was fully planning to execute this massive fraud without ever once acknowledging that I existed on this earth, unless I actively chose to stop her. My trembling fingers typed a response before my terrified brain could even attempt to catch up. Tell me absolutely everything I need to know about the interview logistics. I absolutely did not manage to sleep for 3 consecutive nights. Every single time I closed my exhausted eyes, I vividly saw 2 vastly different versions of myself. The terrified woman who cowardly walked away and never dared to look back, and the traumatized girl who still violently flinched at the mere memory of her mother's venomous voice. I frantically began making extensive lists. That is exactly what my brain does when I cannot process emotions clearly. I compulsively write things down. Reasons absolutely not to execute this plan. She will publicly brand me as mentally unstable, a pathological liar, and a desperate attention seeker. Olivia and Liam will permanently, aggressively hate me. I could potentially face a massive, bankrupting lawsuit for severe defamation. My current life is incredibly peaceful and fine. Why on earth should I detonate a bomb in my own living room? Reasons I absolutely must execute this plan. 500,000 vulnerable people are actively absorbing toxic parenting advice from a monster who maliciously erased her own biological child. I possess the undeniable, hard evidence. I inherently deserve the right to exist in the light. Remaining completely silent exclusively protects the abuser, never the victim. That final, profound sentence. I had gently spoken those exact words to battered patients in the emergency ward before. To brave survivors of domestic violence, of brutal assault, of horrific things they were initially too paralyzed by shame to even name. But I had absolutely never possessed the courage to apply that logic to my own life. I called my best friend, Maya, at 2 o'clock in the morning. She has been my fiercely loyal anchor since our very first day of nursing school. She is literally the only human being on Earth who knows even half of my dark history. Am I completely, clinically insane for even considering doing this? I asked, staring at the ceiling. That heavily depends. Her voice was thick with sleep, but incredibly patient. What exactly would you advise a terrified patient who had been severely abused and finally possessed a golden opportunity to speak their truth to the world? I did not hesitate for a single microsecond. I would tell them that their agonizing story deeply matters. I would tell them that maintaining silence only serves to protect the monster who hurt them. Then I strongly suggest you take your own brilliant advice, Clara. What if I am just acting out of petty, vindictive revenge? I agonized. Maya actually let out a loud, genuine laugh. Keying someone's luxury car in a parking lot is petty revenge. This is aggressively reclaiming your fundamental right to exist. There is a massive, galactic difference. I hung up the phone and stared blankly into the darkness until the dawn finally broke. By the time the sun fully crested the horizon, my ultimate decision was permanently locked in. I was absolutely not doing this for petty revenge. I was not doing this to maliciously destroy her financial empire. I was doing this exclusively for the terrified 14-year-old girl who was coldly told she was inherently too difficult to love. That specific girl absolutely deserved significantly better than a lifetime of silence. Successfully locating Mrs. Gable was shockingly easier than I had initially anticipated. A rapid, targeted search through the Municipal Middle School's alumni network led me directly to a Retired Educators Association, which eventually led me to a public social media profile featuring a highly familiar face. She still possessed those incredibly kind, observant eyes. She simply carried a few more deep laugh lines around them now. I aggressively dialed the listed phone number before I could allow myself to lose my nerve. Mrs. Gable, this is Clara Sullivan. You probably do not. Clara. Her voice violently broke on my name. Oh, my dear God, Clara. Exactly 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car, aggressively driving 3 hours back to my dreaded hometown for the very first time in 12 years. Her house was incredibly small, warm, and cozy, the walls entirely lined with towering bookshelves and framed photographs of smiling, successful former students. She fiercely hugged me the exact moment I stepped through the front door. It was a real, bone-crushing hug. The specific kind of embrace that explicitly says, "I see your soul." "I have thought about you so many countless times," she whispered, pouring hot tea with visibly shaking hands. "I constantly wondered exactly what happened to you, if you were actually safe and okay. I am finally okay now, I replied. It felt incredibly strange to say those words out loud and actually mean them. But I desperately need to ask you about something very specific that occurred back then. Her facial expression instantly shifted, becoming incredibly guarded and deeply sad, exactly as if she had been patiently waiting for this exact conversation for over a decade. I formally filed an official abuse report, she stated incredibly quietly, staring down at her teacup. I filed it with Child Protective Services. Regarding your situation. My teacup froze completely midair. What? I meticulously documented absolutely everything I observed over those months. The mysterious, fading bruises. The rapid, alarming weight loss. The terrifying way you violently flinched whenever anyone casually mentioned your mother's name. She finally met my eyes. I formally submitted the paperwork during my absolute final week of employment at the school. And then, absolutely nothing happened. What exactly do you mean by nothing? I asked, my heart pounding. I mean that someone incredibly powerful ensured the report was immediately marked as unsubstantiated without a single investigation ever taking place. The case was violently closed before it was ever even opened. She slowly stood up and walked over to an ancient, metal filing cabinet situated in the corner of the room. But I aggressively retained a physical copy, just in case. She pulled out a heavily worn manila folder and gently placed it directly into my trembling hands. In case, someday in the distant future, you desperately needed it. I now possessed two massive, undeniable pieces of evidence. The horrifying picture was rapidly becoming crystal clear. I was exactly halfway through the long drive back to my city when my cell phone unexpectedly rang. The name flashing on the digital screen made my hands instantly go completely numb. Olivia Sullivan. I had saved her contact number years ago out of some bizarre, masochistic impulse that I never fully comprehended. But she had absolutely never initiated a call. Not a single time in 12 agonizing years. I hastily pulled the car over onto the gravel shoulder, staring blankly at the glowing screen, watching it ring 4 consecutive times. Then I finally pressed answer. Clara? Her voice was significantly higher than I remembered it being. It sounded incredibly nervous and shaky. Is this actually you? I physically could not force myself to speak for a long moment. The absolute last time I had heard her voice, she was a confused 12-year-old child, desperately asking me why I was packing a backpack in the middle of the night. It is me, I finally managed to whisper. I accidentally discovered your phone number hidden inside Dad's old, discarded cell phone. She was speaking incredibly fast, the exact way people do when they are utterly terrified of the silence. I have desperately wanted to call you for years. I never knew exactly what to say. Why are you calling me right now, Olivia? A long, suffocating pause hung on the line. Mom's new book is officially launching very soon. And I keep experiencing this overwhelming, sinking feeling that something is fundamentally, terribly wrong. That there is some massive, dark secret I do not know about. Another heavy pause. Were you genuinely as terrible and unstable as Mom constantly claims you were? The devastating question hit me like a physical slap across the face. What exactly did she tell you about me? She claimed that you were deeply, psychologically troubled. That you violently ran away into the night because you simply could not handle our strict family values. That we should absolutely never mention your name because it causes Mom too much excruciating pain. I gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white. Absolutely none of that narrative is the truth, Olivia. None of it. Then what exactly is the truth, she pleaded. I thought about the heavy folder currently resting on my passenger seat. The unedited photographs. The venomous email. Mrs. Gable's buried abuse report. I strongly believe you should ask Mom that exact question, I stated incredibly carefully. And I suggest you watch her facial expression very closely when she attempts to answer you. Total silence stretched out between us over the cellular connection. Will I ever see you again? Olivia's voice was incredibly small now. It sounded exactly like that terrified 12-year-old girl. Perhaps. I genuinely meant the word. But there are some massive, explosive things that absolutely need to occur first. I hung up the phone, knowing with absolute certainty that Olivia would immediately rush straight to our mother with the details of our conversation. The explosive countdown clock was officially ticking. The aggressive, formal cease and desist legal order arrived in my email inbox the very next morning. I stared blankly at the digital document, reading the dense legal jargon 3 consecutive times just to ensure I was not actively hallucinating. Immediate cease and desist. Official notice of severe defamation, aggressive harassment, and tortious interference. Dear Ms. Sullivan, this elite corporate law firm currently represents Genevieve Sullivan regarding your recent, highly concerning communications and planned activities. My mother had aggressively lawyered up. Before I had even uttered a single, public syllable, she was already rapidly constructing her impenetrable legal defense. But that was absolutely not the most terrifying part of the morning. I opened my social media application to discover my mother's latest uploaded story. It was a heavily filtered, soft-focus video of her looking tearfully, directly into the camera lens. Certain toxic, deeply unstable individuals from my distant past are actively attempting to maliciously destroy the beautiful community I have built here, she stated, her voice trembling with precisely the right amount of manufactured vulnerability to appear completely authentic. I honestly do not comprehend why. I have only ever desperately tried to be a loving, dedicated mother. Please, I implore you, pray for my family's strength during this incredibly difficult, targeted attack. The digital comments were already flooding in by the thousands. Stay incredibly strong, Queen. Deeply jealous people always aggressively attack pure success. We unconditionally love you, Genevieve. Do not let the toxic haters win. She was aggressively, brilliantly controlling the public narrative. She was intentionally getting ahead of whatever explosive truths I might reveal by proactively painting herself as the ultimate, innocent victim before I could even open my mouth to defend myself. I immediately dialed Sarah's number. She is aggressively making me look like an unhinged villain before I have even done a single thing. That is exactly what malignant narcissists do when they feel threatened. Sarah's voice remained incredibly calm and utterly unsurprised. But she possesses absolutely no idea what hard evidence we currently hold. And she is completely unaware of the impending interview ambush. What exact interview ambush? I've been in covert, intense contact with the television station producing her book launch feature segment. They originally desired a saccharine, family values puff piece. I discreetly mentioned to the producers that I might possess access to a highly critical family member who could offer a vastly different, explosive perspective. My heart literally stopped beating. You absolutely didn't do that? I most certainly did. They're incredibly interested in the drama. A heavy pause. But you would have to officially agree to appear live on set, directly in front of the broadcasting cameras. The aggressive cease and desist email was still open on my laptop screen. I thought deeply about the terrified 14-year-old girl who was brutally commanded to remain silent and invisible. Set the interview up, I demanded. The agonizing night before I officially committed to the ambush, I stood motionless in front of my full-length bedroom mirror, frantically trying on different professional outfits exactly as if I were preparing to deploy to a war zone. A sharp navy blazer. A crisp, high-collared white blouse. I needed to look impeccably professional, yet absolutely not cold or calculating. I briefly caught my own reflection and completely froze. For a terrifying, split second, I was absolutely not 29 years old anymore. I was exactly 14, standing in this exact same, rigid pose, desperately trying to see exactly what my mother saw when she looked at me with such disgust. I was desperately trying to figure out what was so inherently, fundamentally unlovable about my soul. My phone violently buzzed on the dresser. Sarah. The television producer officially confirmed the timeline. You will be brought onto the set immediately following Genevieve's primary segment. She absolutely does not know you are coming. Neither does her powerful literary agent. I rapidly typed my definitive response before my terrified brain could attempt to second-guess the decision. I will absolutely do it, but I possess strict, non-negotiable conditions. My aggressive conditions were relatively simple. 1. This would absolutely not devolve into a trashy, screaming, reality television ambush. The tone must remain strictly professional, relying exclusively on verifiable facts. 2. Genevieve would be granted a fair opportunity to directly respond to every single piece of evidence I presented. I was absolutely not interested in executing a cowardly, one-sided takedown. 3. Olivia and Liam were strictly off-limits from aggressive questioning. They were tragic victims of her manipulation, too, in their own unique ways. 4. I would exclusively state verifiable facts that I could immediately back up with hard, physical documentation. Absolutely no wild, unprovable accusations. Sarah called my phone exactly 10 minutes later. You were actively trying to protect the exact same family that maliciously destroyed you. I am actively protecting my own ironclad integrity, I corrected her firmly. If I stoop to her toxic, manipulative level, I simply become a mirror image of her. Total silence echoed on the other end of the line. You fully understand that this specific strategy might completely fail, right? Sarah's voice was incredibly gentle. She has spent 12 entire years aggressively, meticulously building this impenetrable empire. You are walking into a lion's den armed with a single folder and desperately hoping that the truth actually matters to people. The undeniable truth absolutely does matter, I stated, looking down at the heavy folder resting on my desk. The unedited photographs. The venomous email. Mrs. Gable's buried abuse report. And if it ultimately does not matter to the world, at least I will finally, permanently know the answer. I officially sent my RSVP confirmation to the producer later that night. The absolute point of no return. In exactly 2 weeks, I would look my abuser directly in the eye for the very first time in over a decade. And this time, she would absolutely not possess the power to edit me out of the frame. The hesitant knock echoed on my apartment door at exactly 10 o'clock the night prior to the explosive interview. I was absolutely not expecting a single visitor. Maya was working a late shift at the hospital. Sarah was aggressively prepping the final logistical details with the network. I had planned to spend the entire agonizing evening obsessively reviewing my chronological notes and desperately trying not to vomit from the anxiety. I cautiously opened the door. Liam stood awkwardly in the dim hallway. He was 21 years old now. He was significantly taller than I remembered, and his eyes were red and swollen, exactly as if he had been violently crying for hours. Olivia explicitly told me everything, he stated without any preamble. She told me about the upcoming interview tomorrow morning. I absolutely had to come see you. I slowly stepped aside to grant him entry, still entirely too shocked to properly formulate a coherent sentence. The absolute last time I had laid eyes on my little brother, he was an innocent 9-year-old boy, standing at his bedroom window in the dark, sadly waving as I walked down the driveway with a heavy backpack and absolutely nowhere to go. You actually remember my face? I finally managed to whisper. Of course I remember you. He heavily collapsed onto my living room couch exactly as if his legs could no longer support his body weight. I vividly remember you reading me countless bedtime stories. I remember you making me pancakes on quiet Saturday mornings. I remember the exact way you would sneak me extra cookies when Mom was too busy to notice. I felt hot, stinging tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I forcefully blinked them back. I vividly remember the agonizing night you suddenly disappeared, too, his voice violently cracked. Mom aggressively told us you tragically ran away, but I explicitly saw her physically lock your bedroom door from the outside later that night. I simply did not understand the implications back then. I was entirely too young. Liam, I have been desperately putting the shattered pieces of this puzzle together for years. He looked up at me, and I saw my father's exact, cowardly eyes staring back, but filled with a new, terrified awareness. Mom acts incredibly strange and volatile whenever your name is accidentally mentioned in the house. Dad absolutely refuses to make eye contact with anyone during those moments. Olivia continuously tries to fiercely defend Mom, but I can clearly see the massive doubt eating her alive. He took a long, shaky, shuddering breath. I absolutely do not know the exact, horrific details of what transpired, but I know in my bones that you absolutely did not abandon us willingly. He reached out and tightly grabbed my trembling hand. And I desperately wanted you to know that I am incredibly glad you are finally telling your truth to the world. regardless of the explosive fallout tomorrow. I fiercely hugged my little brother for the very first time in 12 agonizing years. And for the very first time in my existence, I did not feel entirely, suffocatingly alone. Liam departed around midnight, leaving me with a solemn promise to text me for moral support right before the cameras started rolling. Then it was just me and the deafening silence of my apartment. I meticulously spread absolutely everything out across my small kitchen table. I organized the explosive evidence with the exact same clinical precision I utilize when organizing critical patient medical charts. Methodical. Precise. Absolutely zero room for error. The physical photographs. The unedited, raw originals carefully placed on the left side. The aggressively cropped, manipulated versions published by my mother positioned on the right. Displayed side by side, the visual evidence of the erasure was utterly undeniable. The venomous email. I had it aggressively highlighted with neon marker, and I printed 2 identical copies just in case one somehow became damaged in the chaos. Mrs. Gable's official abuse report. It was 15 years old, but the ink was still perfectly legible, and the contents were still absolutely damning. There was one final, explosive item resting at the absolute bottom of the folder. I had almost entirely forgotten its existence. A screenshot of text messages received exactly 5 years ago. It was from an unknown, untraceable number that I later successfully traced directly back to my mother's personal assistant's cellular phone. Permanently stop attempting to contact your siblings. You are officially, permanently dead to this family. I had obsessively saved that screenshot because some rational part of my brain simply could not comprehend that it was real. I could not psychologically accept that my own biological mother could be so unthinkably cruel in permanent, written text. Now it was simply another devastating piece of ammunition in my arsenal. My cell phone aggressively buzzed on the table. It was Maya. Are you fully prepared for this? I rapidly typed back. Please, just tell me I am executing the right decision. Her response materialized instantly. You are executing the incredibly brave decision. That is infinitely more important than it being the right decision. I blankly stared at the popcorn ceiling until 3 o'clock in the morning, obsessively running through every single, terrifying possible scenario in my mind. What if she seamlessly, flawlessly denied absolutely everything? What if the audience and the journalists refused to believe a single word I said? What if I completely froze up under the blinding studio lights and could not force my vocal cords to speak? At exactly 4 o'clock in the morning, I finally abandoned the futile attempt to sleep. I brewed a massive pot of strong coffee and quietly watched the vibrant sunrise bleed through my kitchen window. In exactly 8 hours, my mother would be forced to look directly at my face for the very first time in a decade. In exactly 8 hours, 500,000 devoted followers would aggressively learn that the perfect mom possessed a deeply broken daughter she had actively attempted to erase from the planet. I securely sealed the thick folder, set my alarm clock, and waited patiently for the specific day I had been desperately running toward my entire life. We are finally about to arrive at the explosive interview. The exact, terrifying moment I have been aggressively building toward throughout this entire narrative. But before we step onto that television set, I desperately want to know your opinion. What exactly would you do if you were standing in my shoes? Would you bravely show up and face the fire? Or would you choose to remain safely silent in the shadows? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you have not already subscribed, please do so now. You absolutely will not want to miss exactly how this nightmare concludes. Alright, let us finish this. The local television studio was significantly smaller and far more depressing than I had originally anticipated. I had nervously imagined a grand, sprawling Hollywood set featuring blinding spotlights, towering camera cranes, and a massive audience of hundreds of screaming fans. Instead, it was a highly modest, regional broadcasting station outfitted with heavily worn, stained carpeting and buzzing, cheap fluorescent lighting. There were approximately 50 people seated in squeaky folding chairs serving as the live audience, mostly consisting of middle-aged women who looked exactly as if they had driven straight there from a suburban book club meeting. It was absolutely perfect. It was incredibly intimate. There would be absolutely nowhere for her to hide from the fallout. Name, please? The bored security guard stationed at the front desk barely bothered to look up from his battered clipboard. Clara Sullivan. I am officially here for the Genevieve Sullivan feature segment. He slowly scanned the printed list, then frowned deeply. Your name is absolutely not listed on the authorized guest registry. You need to verify this with the executive producer. Sarah Jenkins personally arranged my access, I stated firmly. He let out a heavy sigh and picked up his desk phone to make a call. I waited anxiously in the sterile lobby, clutching the heavy manila folder tightly against my chest exactly like a suit of physical armor. That is the exact moment I heard it. Her laugh. I would recognize that specific, terrifying sound absolutely anywhere on Earth. It was blindingly bright, heavily practiced, and explicitly designed to charm the listener into submission. It floated ominously down the narrow hallway from somewhere near the VIP green room. And then I finally saw them approach. Genevieve confidently walked at the absolute front of the group, draped in expensive, cream-colored cashmere, wearing a flawless, beaming smile that could effortlessly sell a bridge to nowhere. Following closely behind her was Olivia, dressed in soft, compliant pastels. Liam trudged behind her, wearing an uncomfortable blazer. My father trailed at the very back, looking exactly as if he would rather be undergoing a root canal without anesthesia than be present. And flanking my mother was a sharp-featured, severe-looking woman wearing a high-end, aggressive designer suit. It had to be Evelyn Russo, her powerful literary agent. They were confidently heading toward the green room to prepare. They absolutely had not noticed my presence yet, but Olivia did. She abruptly stopped mid-step in the hallway. All the color violently drained from her face. Clara, she gasped softly. Genevieve immediately turned around to follow her daughter's gaze. For one frozen, terrifying, agonizing moment, we simply stared directly at each other. Mother and daughter. Separated by 12 long years of silence and exactly 20 feet of cheap studio carpeting. I explicitly saw her flawless, curated mask slip for just a fraction of a microsecond. Pure, unadulterated fear and burning, violent fury aggressively flickered across her facial features before she violently smoothed them back into something loosely resembling maternal composure. What on earth are you doing in this building? Her voice was absolute, freezing ice. I was formally invited, I replied smoothly. Evelyn Russo looked frantically between the two of us, utter confusion clearly written across her sharp face. Genevieve, who exactly is this young woman? My mother's jaw tightened so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. She is absolutely no one important. Just a deeply troubled individual from a very long time ago. Actually, I stated, my voice echoing with terrifying calm. I am her biological daughter. Her very first biological daughter. The exact one she conveniently forgot to mention in her memoir. The heavy silence that immediately followed that statement was absolutely deafening. The frantic executive producer abruptly appeared in the hallway before absolutely anyone could formulate a response. Miss Sullivan, both of you. She looked incredibly harried, sweating profusely, and clearly entirely unprepared to manage explosive family drama in her hallway just minutes before broadcasting. We're going live in exactly 3 minutes. Genevieve, your primary segment is up first. And you, she pointed a shaking finger directly at me. Please come with me immediately. I was quickly ushered into a tiny, cramped viewing room outfitted with several small monitors displaying the live studio feed. Sarah was already sitting inside, holding a digital tablet. Are you holding up okay? Please ask me that exact same question in about an hour. On the glowing screen, Genevieve confidently settled into her plush interview chair exactly as if she legally owned the entire broadcasting network. The cheerful, blonde host, a woman named Janet, leaned aggressively forward with a look of practiced, deep interest. We are incredibly honored to be here today with Genevieve Sullivan, the brilliant author of the highly anticipated upcoming book, Raising Perfection. Genevieve, please share with our audience. What exactly is your ultimate, foundational secret to successfully raising such incredibly wonderful, well-adjusted children? My mother's face instantly transformed. It became incredibly soft, radiating warm, perfect maternal energy. Absolute presence, she answered flawlessly. I am absolutely always physically and emotionally present for my beloved kids. Every single milestone, every single shed tear, every single triumphant victory. I absolutely never ever miss a single moment of their beautiful lives. I felt Sarah's warm hand grip my shoulder, offering a steadying presence. Some of your harsher critics frequently argue that your social media presence paints an entirely too perfect, unrealistic picture of motherhood. Janet continued her questioning. How exactly do you respond to those accusations? I enthusiastically share our genuine, real life with the world. My mother laughed, a light, dismissive sound. I share the beautiful, joyous days and the incredibly challenging, messy days. Exactly what you see on my feed is exactly who we are. Warts and absolutely all. I actually let out a loud, bitter snort of derision in the viewing room. Warts and all. She aggressively, surgically cropped me out of every single wart. On the screen, the camera seamlessly cut to a shot of Olivia and Liam sitting stiffly beside their parents. Olivia's bright smile looked painfully, artificially painted on. Liam simply stared blankly down at his expensive shoes. And Thomas, what specific role do you play in managing this flawless family dynamic? Janet asked. My father delivered his heavily rehearsed, pathetic answer. I am simply the humble supporting cast. Genevieve is undeniably the shining star of the show. Polite, gentle laughter rippled through the studio audience. Sarah's digital tablet suddenly vibrated. She quickly checked the incoming message, then looked directly at me. You are scheduled to walk on set in exactly 2 minutes. I slowly picked up my heavy manila folder. 12 agonizing years of suffocating silence. The silence ended right now. The overhead studio lights were significantly brighter and significantly hotter than I had anticipated. I walked confidently onto the live set exactly as the broadcast returned from the commercial break. Every single step I took felt exactly like I was wading through deep, heavy water. The studio audience immediately began to murmur in confusion. Genevieve's face went completely, terrifyingly rigid. We actually have an incredibly special, unexpected surprise guest joining our panel today, Janet announced, nervously reading from a digital teleprompter she clearly had not reviewed beforehand. Someone who boldly claims to possess a significantly different, unique perspective on this supposedly perfect family. Please give a warm welcome to Clara Sullivan. I calmly sat down in the empty chair positioned directly across from my mother. I was seated close enough to clearly see the frantic vein aggressively pulsing in her temple. Olivia gasped loudly, a highly audible sound over the microphones. Liam's facial expression flickered violently with something that closely resembled profound relief. My father looked exactly like a cornered animal desperately calculating the fastest route to the nearest emergency exit. Situated directly behind the massive camera rigs, I clearly spotted Evelyn Russo abruptly sitting up completely straight in her chair, her smartphone already gripped tightly in her hand. Clara, Janet desperately attempted to recover her professional composure. You aggressively reached out to our producers, claiming to be Genevieve's biological daughter. However, Genevieve has absolutely never, ever mentioned your existence publicly in any capacity. Can you please explain this discrepancy? I intentionally kept my vocal tone incredibly steady, calm, and entirely professional. Genevieve is my biological mother. I physically resided inside her home until I reached the age of 17. Then I permanently fled the premises because I absolutely possessed no other choice for my own survival. This is my deeply troubled, estranged daughter, Genevieve violently cut in, her voice unnaturally smooth and practiced. She has unfortunately struggled intensely with severe mental health issues for many, many years. I am a fully licensed, registered trauma nurse at St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital, I countered, never raising my voice. I absolutely did not need to scream. I possess absolutely zero mental health diagnoses on my record. I would be more than happy to publicly provide my complete employment records and exhaustive medical clearances to this network. Genevieve's mouth opened to argue, then abruptly snapped shut. She possessed absolutely no prepared rebuttal for cold, hard facts. What I absolutely do possess here today, I continued relentlessly, is irrefutable, hard documentation of something significantly more sinister. I smoothly opened the heavy folder resting on my lap and pulled out the very first physical photograph. This is a family holiday photograph taken in 2008. This is the raw, unedited original version. I handed the glossy photograph directly to Janet. There are exactly 4 people present in this image: Genevieve, Thomas, Olivia, and myself. I pulled out the second piece of evidence. This is the exact same photograph. But this is the heavily manipulated version Genevieve officially posted on her lucrative blog. This is the exact version 500,000 people have viewed online. Janet nervously held both photographs up side by side for the primary camera to capture. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. The studio audience collectively gasped in horror. There are only exactly 3 people present in the second photograph. The space exactly where I should have been standing is absolutely nothing but digitally altered, empty background space. Would you care to explain this to your audience? I asked, turning to face my mother directly. Exactly why have you spent 12 entire years aggressively, surgically erasing my existence from the historical record? Genevieve miraculously recovered her composure significantly faster than I anticipated. Old, physical photographs are frequently cropped to improve the visual composition of the image, she stated, her voice remaining terrifyingly steady, although her hands were now visibly trembling in her lap. That isolated edit proves absolutely nothing. This entire stunt is clearly a desperate, unhinged attempt to seek attention and say that I rapidly pulled out the printed email document and handed it directly to Janet. This is a printed copy of an email correspondence sent directly from Genevieve to her primary literary agent, dated March of 2012. Would you please read the highlighted section aloud for the audience? Janet hesitated significantly, casting a frantic, terrified glance toward the off-screen producer, who aggressively nodded for her to proceed. She nervously cleared her throat. Regarding the upcoming family branding strategy, I want to be entirely, explicitly clear. I only possess 2 children. Please ensure you absolutely never mention the name Clara in any of our promotional materials or press releases. She paused, her face straining of all color. She is absolutely not a part of this brand. Complete, absolute, dead silence descended upon the studio. 50 people were packed into that room. Not a single one of them dared to breathe a word. That email quote was viciously taken entirely out of context. Genevieve started to argue, panic finally bleeding into her voice. What conceivable context possibly makes the statement, "She is absolutely not a part of this brand," acceptable? I asked, maintaining my voice at a level, almost gentle pitch. What exact context justifies a mother actively, maliciously erasing her own biological daughter? Out of my peripheral vision, I noticed sudden, aggressive movement. Evelyn Russo was already on her feet, aggressively storming toward the studio exit with her cell phone pressed tightly to her ear. There is exactly one more piece of evidence, I stated, pulling out the final, devastating document. When I was in the 8th grade, my literature teacher formally filed a severe abuse report with Child Protective Services. She meticulously documented glaring signs of extreme neglect and severe emotional abuse occurring inside your home. Genevieve's flawless composure finally, completely cracked. That is an absolute, fabricated lie. The municipal report was officially marked as unsubstantiated, without a single investigation ever taking place. Someone incredibly powerful ensured the report completely disappeared from the system. I calmly handed the aged copy directly to Janet. But Mrs. Gable aggressively retained her own personal copy of the paperwork because she instinctively knew that someday in the future, the undeniable truth might actually matter. Genevieve desperately turned toward the main broadcasting cameras, pure, unadulterated desperation violently bleeding through her usually perfect facade. This entire segment is a malicious, targeted witch hunt. This is... Mom, please just stop. Every single head on the set violently turned toward Olivia. My little sister was openly weeping on live television, thick black mascara running in rivers down her cheeks, but her vocal tone was incredibly steady and commanding. Just please, stop lying. The devastating words hung suspended in the hot studio air exactly like toxic smoke lingering after a massive explosion. Genevieve's face, The exact face I had spent my entire agonizing childhood desperately trying to please, completely crumpled into an expression I had absolutely never witnessed before. It was not genuine remorse. It was not maternal guilt. It was pure, unadulterated terror. It was the absolute, suffocating terror of a narcissist who had just watched their entire, meticulously curated universe violently collapse on live television. The network abruptly cut the broadcast to a commercial break. The exact microsecond the red lights on the broadcasting cameras turned off, sheer chaos violently erupted on the set. Genevieve stood up so aggressively that her heavy chair nearly toppled backward onto the floor. She managed to take exactly 3 frantic steps toward the studio exit before Evelyn Russo aggressively blocked her path. The literary agent's face was carved out of absolute, freezing granite. "Genevieve, I literally just got off the phone with the senior executives at the publishing house." Her sharp voice carried clearly across the sudden silence of the studio. "They're aggressively, immediately pausing your upcoming book release pending a comprehensive, formal investigation." "Evelyn, you absolutely cannot do this to me." "I absolutely can, and I absolutely am doing it." Evelyn's eyes were completely devoid of any sympathy. "I absolutely do not legally represent pathological liars. And I especially do not represent monsters who maliciously erase the existence of their own children." She turned on her heel and confidently walked out of the studio doors without casting a single glance backward. Genevieve stood completely frozen in the center of the room, silently watching her entire, lucrative career evaporate through the exit doors. "Honey," my father weakly reached out to touch her arm. "Do not touch me," my mother hissed, her voice barely a venomous whisper. "Just do not touch me." Through the entirety of the chaos, I remained firmly seated in my chair, the empty manila folder resting on my lap, my heart violently pounding against my ribs, but my hands incredibly steady. Liam confidently walked over to me, completely ignoring everyone else in our broken family, and wrapped his arms tightly around my shoulders in front of the entire stunned crew. "I am so incredibly proud of you," he murmured softly against my hair. I hugged him back fiercely, completely unable to formulate words. Olivia was still sitting rigidly in her chair, tears streaming silently down her face. I slowly walked over and crouched down directly beside her. "I am so incredibly sorry you had to find out the truth in this public manner." She looked directly at me with eyes that held 12 entire years of unanswered questions. "You're sorry," she let out a short, hollow, bitter laugh. "I have been actively living inside a massive lie for my entire life. I actually possessed a sister. A real sister. And she maliciously forced me to completely forget you existed. You were only 12 years old when I fled the house. You absolutely did not know the reality of the situation. I desperately want to know the absolute truth now." She grabbed my hand tightly, exactly like a drowning woman grabbing a lifeline. "Absolutely everything. Can we please sit down and talk after this nightmare ends? I would truly like that." Janet cautiously approached me as the stunned audience was being quickly ushered out of the studio. That was entirely, completely unprecedented. She slowly shook her head in disbelief. "Are you going to be okay?" I looked at my brother standing proudly beside me and my sister tightly holding my hand. For the absolute first time in 12 agonizing years, I was no longer an invisible ghost. I am still firmly standing on my own 2 feet. That is significantly more than I ever expected to achieve today. By midnight that evening, my name was aggressively trending across the internet. The perfect mom scandal had spread across social media platforms like an uncontrollable, violent wildfire. Every single platform hosted its own unique, explosive version of what had transpired. Parenting influencer Genevieve Sullivan's secret, erased daughter finally speaks out. The perfect mom's imperfect, horrific secret. Daughter she maliciously erased for a decade confronts her live on morning television. Who else in the influencer space is aggressively lying to us? Internet demands answers following viral ambush interview. I sat on my couch and silently watched my mother's massive follower count aggressively plummet exactly like a crashing stock market ticker. Down 5,000. Down 10,000. Down 20,000 followers in a matter of hours. Sarah's comprehensive, devastating article officially dropped at exactly 6 o'clock the next morning. The full, unvarnished story. The unedited photographs. The damning email. Mrs. Gable's buried abuse report. By noon, absolutely every single major media outlet had aggressively picked up the story. My personal cell phone absolutely would not stop vibrating. Text messages from stunned corporate colleagues. OMG, Clara, I had absolutely no idea you survived that. Messages from old high school classmates. I always inherently knew something was deeply, fundamentally toxic about your family dynamic. Messages from complete, anonymous strangers. Your terrifying story finally gave me the sheer courage to speak up about the abuse I suffered from my own mother. That final, specific message stopped me dead in my tracks. I read the words 3 consecutive times. Maya arrived at my apartment later that evening carrying a massive bag of greasy takeout food and a premium bottle of wine. "How exactly are you feeling?" she asked gently. I stared blankly at the ceiling, entirely too exhausted to formulate a lie. "I honestly do not know yet. Please ask me again in a week." My phone buzzed loudly on the counter. A text message from Liam. "I am so incredibly proud of you. Mom has aggressively locked herself inside the master bedroom and absolutely refuses to come out. Dad is currently getting drunk alone in the garage." Then another message arrived. It was from a completely unknown, blocked number. "You are going to deeply, severely regret this betrayal." There was absolutely no signature attached, but I inherently knew exactly who had sent the threat. I silently showed the screen to Maya. She aggressively rolled her eyes in disgust. A vaguely threatening text message? Seriously? After absolutely everything that just exploded on live television? I permanently blocked the number without offering a response. Perhaps she was actually right. Perhaps, in the dark hours of the night, I would eventually regret detonating the bomb. But as I continued to scroll through endless message after message from survivors who had finally felt seen, who had finally felt believed because of my actions, I simply could not bring myself to care about her pathetic threats. I had been forced to be invisible for 29 agonizing years. Absolutely not anymore. Genevieve's highly anticipated response video officially dropped exactly 3 days later. She was sitting perfectly poised in her pristine living room, impeccably lit with professional ring lights, of course, because aesthetics matter even during a catastrophic crisis. Artificial, glistening tears streamed endlessly down her face as she spoke directly, pleadingly into the camera lens. "My beautiful family has recently endured something entirely unimaginable," she began, her voice trembling with precisely the right amount of manufactured emotion. "My eldest daughter, Clara, and I have historically navigated a highly complicated, difficult relationship. I have certainly made parenting mistakes in the past. I am absolutely not a perfect human being. Absolutely no mother is flawless. Maya and I watched the performance together in silence on my laptop. But I absolutely never, ever stopped unconditionally loving her," Genevieve continued, wiping a tear. "I simply did not possess the tools to successfully reach her. Clara has tragically struggled with severe, unfounded feelings of parental rejection since early childhood. I desperately attempted to protect her fragile mental state by keeping her completely out of the harsh, judgmental public spotlight. I clearly see now that my protective actions were misguided. Utterly unbelievable," Maya muttered in deep disgust. "She is aggressively twisting the narrative to make herself the tragic, misunderstood victim." The digital comments below the video were highly mixed. "This absolutely sounds exactly like desperate corporate damage control. She is obviously just aggressively trying to protect her lucrative brand sponsorships." Clara seemed incredibly credible and provided hard evidence, though. Perhaps there really are 2 valid sides to every story. Sarah called my phone later that afternoon. "Do you passionately desire to issue a formal response? I can easily set up an exclusive, follow-up interview for you." "No," I replied without a single second of hesitation. She is desperately attempting to drag me into a chaotic, public back-and-forth screaming match to muddy the waters. The hard, physical evidence absolutely speaks entirely for itself. "Are you absolutely certain?" I have successfully said absolutely everything I needed to say to the world. I am absolutely not playing psychological ping-pong with a malignant narcissist. I disconnected the call and stared silently out my apartment window at the glittering city lights below. A tiny, pathetic part of my soul, the terrified little girl who still vividly remembered meticulously crafting beautiful Mother's Day cards that never, ever made it onto the refrigerator door, desperately wanted Genevieve's tearful video to be genuine. I desperately wanted to believe that she had magically, fundamentally changed overnight. That perhaps, finally, she actually experienced genuine remorse for destroying my childhood. But her manufactured tears were absolutely not shed for me. They were shed exclusively for her lost, adoring followers, her abruptly canceled book deal, and her permanently shattered, lucrative public image. I went to bed incredibly early that night. I cried violently in the dark for over an hour. I did not cry for myself. I cried for the loving, protective mother I absolutely never possessed, and the monster I was finally, permanently learning how to let go of forever. Olivia unexpectedly showed up at my apartment door exactly 5 days after the explosive interview. Absolutely no prior warning, just a hesitant knock, and my younger sister was standing in the hallway with red-rimmed, swollen eyes, clutching a heavy cardboard box. "I successfully located these hidden away in the attic," she stated without any preamble. They were aggressively hidden deep behind Mom's old college memorabilia. More photographs. More physical evidence. I stepped aside to let her enter. We sat together on my living room couch for hours, spreading the massive pile of photographs across the cushions exactly like pieces of a horrific, tragic puzzle. Pictures I had absolutely never seen before. Family birthday parties where I was clearly, physically present in the frame. School events where I was standing directly next to Olivia. All of them aggressively, meticulously cropped in the published, public versions. All of them proving, time and time again, that I was absolutely not fabricating a single detail of the abuse. "Tell me absolutely everything," Olivia demanded, her voice breaking. "Start from the very beginning." So I did. I recounted the aggressive, digital cropping, the suffocating, intentional silence, the countless dinner tables where I sat completely invisible, the agonizing day I finally fled the house, and the devastating realization that absolutely no one was ever going to come searching for me. Olivia quietly cried the entire time I spoke. "I genuinely thought I possessed the absolute perfect, flawless childhood," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "Now I honestly do not even know what parts of my life were actually real. Your childhood experiences were absolutely not fake, Olivia." I gently reached out and took her trembling hand. "Mom's intense love for you was absolutely not fabricated. It is just. I simply was not permitted to be included in that love." "Why exactly?" Her voice violently cracked. "Why on earth did she choose to love me and aggressively reject you?" I had endlessly asked myself that exact same, agonizing question 1,000 times over the years. I strongly believe I constantly reminded her of a specific time in her life she desperately wanted to permanently forget. Before the lucrative blog launched. Before she transformed into the perfect mom. I clearly saw her when she was deeply struggling, when she was profoundly flawed and failing. I squeezed her hand tightly. She absolutely never forgave me for simply being a living, breathing witness to her profound flaws. That is so incredibly, deeply messed up. It is. But you absolutely did not do a single thing wrong. And I desperately do not want you to carry an ounce of survivor's guilt simply for being loved. Olivia leaned over and wrapped her arms tightly around my neck. A genuine, real, desperate hug. The very first authentic embrace she had offered me since she was 12 years old. "Can we please try to start over?" she asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I desperately want to truly know my older sister. I would absolutely love that too. My father unexpectedly called my phone exactly 2 weeks after the interview aired. I almost aggressively hit the ignore button, but some bizarre instinct inside me, perhaps the tiny part that still faintly remembered him awkwardly teaching me how to ride a bicycle in the driveway, pressed the accept button instead. "Can we please meet in person?" His voice sounded incredibly exhausted and defeated. Just the two of us. I explicitly chose a bustling, independent coffee shop located entirely across the city. It was public enough to ensure my physical safety, yet private enough to facilitate a deeply difficult conversation. He looked exactly as if he had aggressively aged an entire decade in 2 weeks. He wore a deeply wrinkled dress shirt, his face was unshaven, and his eyes nervously darted around the room, entirely unable to remain still. "I absolutely owe you a massive, profound apology," he stated before I could even slide into the booth opposite him. "I owe it to you 12 entire years too late." I remained completely silent and simply waited. "I intimately knew exactly what your mother was actively doing to you." The devastating words tumbled out of his mouth exactly as if they had been violently trapped inside his chest for years. "I sat there and watched her methodically crop you out of photographs. I silently listened to her explicitly tell you that you were inherently hard to love. And I actively did absolutely nothing to stop it. Why exactly didn't you intervene?" He stared intensely at his black coffee, entirely unable to meet my piercing gaze. "Because I was a pathetic, terrified weakling. Because aggressively confronting Genevieve meant I would be forced to actually confront my own massive failures. Because remaining comfortably married to the perfect mom was infinitely easier than being married to a deeply flawed, abusive woman I would actually have to engage in conflict with." He finally looked up, tears brimming in his eyes. "I actively chose the easy path over the morally right path. Every single agonizing day of your childhood, I aggressively chose easy." The horrific admission hung heavy and suffocating in the air between us. "I am absolutely not sitting here asking for your forgiveness." His voice violently broke. "I explicitly know I do not deserve an ounce of it. But I desperately wanted you to know that the abuse was absolutely not your fault. It was never, ever your fault. You were the absolute best, most brilliant thing in our broken family. And I violently threw you away like garbage. I intensely studied the broken man who had served as my biological father for 17 years. The coward who had silently watched me suffer in agony and absolutely never once intervened to save me. I honestly do not know if I possess the capacity to ever forgive you," I finally stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "Perhaps someday in the distant future. Or perhaps absolutely never in this lifetime." He offered a slow, defeated nod, completely accepting the verdict. "But thank you for finally possessing the courage to say it out loud." He quietly left a $20 bill on the table and walked out of the shop without ever looking back. I sat completely alone in that booth for another entire hour, sipping cold coffee and processing the massive, crushing weight of absolutely everything that remained unsaid. The final, explosive phone call occurred exactly 1 month following the television interview. I was peacefully cooking dinner in my apartment, an activity I had actually begun to genuinely enjoy now that I finally possessed people in my life worth cooking for. Olivia came over twice a week for dinner. Liam usually visited on Sundays. My cell phone screen suddenly lit up. Genevieve Sullivan. I stared blankly at the glowing screen for 3 entire rings. 4 rings. 5 rings. Then I calmly pressed answer. "You aggressively, maliciously destroyed absolutely everything I spent my life building." No polite preamble. No fake, honeyed greeting. Just her true voice, incredibly cold and violently cracking with rage. "No," I replied, turning off the heat on the stove. "You systematically destroyed it yourself with your own actions. I simply showed the world the exact things you desperately tried to keep hidden. I generously provided you with a beautiful home, organic food, and an elite education. You aggressively gave me just barely enough to biologically survive, while simultaneously making me feel like absolute garbage." I intentionally kept my voice incredibly calm, completely refusing to allow her to drag me down into a chaotic screaming match. That is absolutely not the definition of parenting. That is the definition of basic, reluctant tolerance. Absolute silence violently stretched across the cellular connection. "You simply do not understand the pressure." Her voice abruptly shifted, shrinking into something significantly smaller, almost pathetically vulnerable. "Whenever I was forced to look at your face, I explicitly saw every single massive failure I ever experienced. Every single time I felt I was not good enough, your existence was living proof that I wasn't the flawless mother I desperately wanted to be. So, you aggressively, maliciously erased my existence from the world instead of actually doing the hard work to improve yourself." Maybe. A long, shuddering exhale echoed over the line. "Maybe that is exactly what I did." I waited patiently for more. I waited for a genuine apology, a rational explanation, absolutely anything resembling maternal remorse. It absolutely never came. "I absolutely do not require your pathetic apology anymore," I stated with finality. "I do not require your toxic validation to justify my existence. I explicitly know that I exist. I know with absolute certainty that I matter in this universe, regardless of whether you ever admit it or not. You certainly sound exactly like you have completely moved on." I am aggressively getting there. More heavy, suffocating silence. "Goodbye, Mom." I disconnected the call before she could offer a single response. I stood perfectly still in my kitchen for a very long moment, simply waiting for a massive emotion to hit me. Searing anger, suffocating grief, vindictive satisfaction. What I ultimately felt instead genuinely surprised me. Absolute peace. It was not joyous happiness. It was not neat, cinematic closure, exactly. It was just profound, unshakable quiet. The agonizing war was officially over, and I had victoriously survived the carnage. 6 months later, I honestly barely recognized the beautiful trajectory of my own life. Genevieve's lucrative blog had been completely, permanently deleted from the internet, taking years of fabricated, perfect family content down with it. Her massive book publishing deal had completely evaporated into thin air. The devoted followers who had once aggressively hung onto her every published word had seamlessly moved on to obsess over the next internet scandal. The absolute last rumor I heard suggested she had finally enrolled in intensive psychotherapy. Whether she actually believed she required psychological help or simply desired the optical appearance of seeking help, I honestly did not know. And I genuinely did not care anymore. She and my father had officially separated and were currently aggressively navigating a brutal divorce settlement. Olivia proactively moved to a bustling city exactly 40 minutes away from my apartment. She eagerly calls my phone every single Sunday, sometimes twice a day. We are aggressively, beautifully learning how to be authentic sisters. Real, flawed sisters, absolutely not the cropped out, fantasy version our mother maliciously created for the cameras. "I am officially starting intensive therapy next week," she confided in me recently. "I desperately need to process the massive trauma of experiencing a fake, fabricated childhood." "That is incredibly healthy," I had replied. "I learned the absolute hardest way from the best teacher." She paused on the line. My amazing older sister. The resilient nurse who miraculously survived 18 agonizing years of being completely invisible and somehow managed to come out the other side entirely intact. I absolutely did not feel completely intact most days, but I was undeniably getting there. Liam proudly graduated from university in May. He consciously chose to spend the Thanksgiving holiday with me instead of enduring the tension with our parents. It was the very first time in 12 entire years that I had joyously cooked a massive turkey. My father awkwardly sends generic greeting cards on major holidays now. I actually open and read them. I have absolutely not responded yet. Perhaps someday I will. Sarah Jenkins successfully won a highly prestigious regional journalism award for her devastating exposé article. She emotionally dedicated the award directly to her late friend Maya, who tragically did not survive her own mother's suffocating, perfect family performance. Mrs. Gable unexpectedly became a celebrated, minor celebrity in our former hometown. She aggressively advocates now for significantly better CPS follow-up protocols, fiercely ensuring that vital abuse reports exactly like hers never silently disappear into bureaucratic, corrupt black holes again. As for my own life, I successfully earned a massive promotion to the role of senior nurse supervisor at the hospital. My cozy apartment currently features hundreds of vibrant photographs hanging proudly on every single wall. Pictures prominently featuring me, Olivia, and Liam. Pictures where absolutely nobody has been aggressively, maliciously cropped out of the frame. I eagerly started journaling my experiences again, aggressively writing down the terrifying story I had spent my entire life being too paralyzed by fear to tell. 6 short months ago, my existence was completely unacknowledged by the world. Now, I possess a beautiful, chosen family that actively wants my presence. As it turns out, that specific reality is more than enough. Some quiet nights, I still tentatively pull the heavy manila folder out of the closet. I absolutely do not do this to torture my soul, but simply to remind myself of the victory. The physical photographs appear significantly different to my eyes now. They feel less like damning, criminal evidence and infinitely more like ancient, historical artifacts originating from an entirely different lifetime. The terrified, small girl captured in those pictures, smiling hopefully beside a mother who would inevitably, aggressively erase her from existence, feels exactly like looking at a complete stranger. But she is undeniably also me. She is the exact reason I am sitting here, breathing and surviving today. I proudly keep exactly one original photograph displayed on my living room mantel now. Christmas, 2008. The unedited, raw original version. The four of us standing happily in front of the towering tree. My arm is wrapped securely around Olivia. Both of us are laughing hysterically at some joke our father had just made. I honestly do not remember what was so incredibly funny in that moment, but I vividly, viscerally remember exactly how it felt. It felt exactly like I truly belonged. For 12 agonizing years, I falsely believed that being aggressively erased was entirely my own fault. I falsely believed that if I had just been inherently easier to manage, significantly quieter, and infinitely more lovable, she would have graciously kept me in the picture frame. Here is the profound, ultimate truth I finally understand. Certain toxic individuals absolutely do not edit you out of their lives because you are inherently wrong or broken. They violently edit you out because you are undeniable, living evidence. You are the explicit evidence proving that they are absolutely not the flawless, perfect humans they desperately pretend to be. You absolutely cannot force a broken person to love you. You absolutely cannot force a narcissist to truly see you. But you absolutely possess the power to ensure that you always fiercely see your own worth. That is the ultimate, truest victory. The victory was absolutely not the viral, explosive television interview. The victory was not aggressively watching my mother's lucrative career collapse into ash. The victory was not even miraculously regaining my relationships with my siblings. The absolute victory is this: I explicitly know exactly who I am now. I am a highly skilled medical professional who saves lives on a daily basis. I am a fiercely loyal sister who shows up when it counts. I am a resilient woman who aggressively refused to remain invisible in the dark. I am absolutely no longer the discarded, cropped-out girl. I am the entire, beautiful, unedited picture. And absolutely nobody, not my toxic mother, not the legions of followers who blindly believed her lies, and certainly not the lingering, dark voice in my head that still occasionally whispers that I am too hard to love, can ever successfully edit that truth out of existence. I gently place the heavy folder back inside the closet, firmly close the door, and for the absolute first time in 29 years, I feel something I genuinely never thought I would ever possess. I feel completely, undeniably at home. If you are sitting there wondering if I explicitly set out with the malicious intent to completely destroy my mother's life, the absolute answer is no. I exclusively set out with the desperate intent to simply exist in the light. Her massive, public destruction was merely the inevitable consequence of her own toxic choices, absolutely not mine. I simply aggressively refused to remain an invisible ghost anymore. Do I regularly communicate with her now? No. Perhaps I absolutely never will again. And that reality is completely, entirely okay. Establishing firm boundaries is absolutely not a vindictive punishment. It is vital, necessary self-protection. Olivia and I are actively building something incredibly authentic and real. We text each other every single day. Sometimes we discuss incredibly heavy, traumatic memories. Sometimes we simply share internet jokes and discuss dinner recipes. Liam is aggressively figuring out exactly who he is as a man without the crushing weight of fulfilling our parents' perfect family expectations. Even my cowardly father is slowly, painfully learning that his silence was the ultimate form of abuse complicity. Some individuals frequently ask me if I harbor any regrets about executing this plan so publicly. If I secretly wish I had handled the confrontation significantly differently, perhaps quietly, behind closed doors. The absolute, unvarnished answer is no. Because I constantly think about all the other invisible Blairs currently suffering out there in the world. The countless daughters and sons being aggressively cropped out of their own family narratives. The terrified children being explicitly told they are simply too much, too difficult, and inherently too hard to love. Perhaps one of those children stumbled across my viral interview. Perhaps one of them finally experienced the profound realization that the abuse is absolutely not their fault. It was absolutely never their fault. Providing that validation is worth infinitely more than maintaining a toxic, fabricated peace and quiet. I confidently go to my job. I actively save lives. I am surrounded by genuine friends who explicitly know and love the real, unedited version of my soul. I possess a beautiful, small apartment featuring vibrant photographs covering every single wall. Photographs with me proudly existing in them. Was the explosive fallout truly worth it? Every single, agonizing moment was worth it. Because the only other alternative was enduring another 12 miserable years of being aggressively cropped out of my own existence. And I was absolutely, entirely unwilling to pay that devastating price anymore. And neither should you. So, exactly why did my mother commit the atrocities she did? I have spent an incredible amount of time agonizing over this specific question. I have extensively discussed the pathology with highly trained therapists. I have obsessively read clinical psychological literature regarding narcissistic parents until my vision blurred. Here is the dark, uncomfortable truth I have finally come to understand. Genevieve grew up in extreme, crushing poverty, severely neglected by her own mother. She aggressively swore to the universe that she would be entirely different. She would be the ultimate, flawless, perfect mother. The one who absolutely never failed. But somewhere along that desperate journey, the concept of perfect stopped equating to genuine love. It completely mutated into an obsession with aesthetic image. I was unfortunately born during her most difficult, struggling years. I personally witnessed the crushing poverty, the screaming arguments, the specific times when she was absolutely not perfect. And for a woman aggressively building an entire, lucrative brand centered entirely around the illusion of perfection, my existence became a massive, undeniable liability. Clinical psychologists explicitly refer to this phenomenon as a narcissistic injury. When a deeply broken individual's entire sense of self-worth relies absolutely on appearing flawless, anyone who actively threatens to expose that illusion instantly becomes the mortal enemy. I was no longer viewed as her daughter. I was simply undeniable, living evidence of absolutely everything she desperately wanted to pretend never happened. As for my own psychology, why exactly did I remain completely silent for so incredibly long? Severe trauma bonding. When the specific human being who is biologically obligated to love you actively withholds that affection, you frantically spend your entire existence desperately trying to earn it. I continually, pathetically thought, if I am just flawlessly good enough, incredibly quiet enough, and sufficiently small enough, she will finally, miraculously see my worth. I was absolutely not a weak person for desperately craving my own mother's love. I was simply human. But I was catastrophically wrong to ever believe that her profound inability to love my soul was somehow a reflection of my own failure. If absolutely any part of this dark narrative sounds disturbingly familiar to your own life, if a toxic individual in your orbit aggressively makes you feel invisible, exactly like you must violently shrink your own soul just to be tolerated, I desperately want you to know an absolute truth. You are absolutely, entirely not the problem in the dynamic. Their profound, psychological inability to properly see your worth is absolutely not your fault. And you are 100% legally and morally allowed to aggressively walk away from toxic people who maliciously hurt you. Even if those specific people happen to be your immediate family. Your right to exist in the light is absolutely not up for editing. That is the entire, unvarnished truth of my story. Thank you so incredibly much for staying and listening to the absolute end. I am fully aware it was a massive, heavy narrative. If this specific journey resonated deeply within your spirit, please consider leaving a comment. Tell me your own story of survival. I genuinely promise you, I read every single one. And if you harbor a desire for more stories of triumph like this one, please hit subscribe, smash the notification bell, and definitely check out the related video linked in the description below. Please take absolute, uncompromising care of yourselves out there. You undeniably matter.